Okay, so I wanted to make a short little video explaining my experience with the recent Duelist Cup, um, my sort of recap of everything. I made this post on Twitter explaining a little bit about my experience and what I played and how well I did, but obviously on Twitter you can't really say much, you have a very limited amount of text allowed, so I wanted to make a video just explaining a little bit more in depth what my thoughts and experience was. So to start with, this was my results. In the end, this was my highest. I got to 49,000 points. It wasn't what I ended at. I ended up 48,000. Not immediately after getting to 49, I sort of fell back down and tried to reach 49 again, but I never actually got there by the end. So this was the highest that I reached at some point throughout the day, or the weekend, and that's a little bit away from my highest ever, which is 54,000, which is a result I got during last year's WCQ, which did get me 5th overall in the region, in the EU region, but it wasn't a top 10 global, and of course this wasn't a top 10 global either, and that's something that I have never done, and I'm really trying to achieve. I want one day to get to a top 10 finish, to get that gold icon, and also, of course, qualify for Worlds one day. That would be even more of a dream. So yeah, that's something that I'm looking forward to trying again at. Like I said here, I said in my tweet, I'll keep trying. I always feel really motivated after every Duelist Cup. I played Tempai for the most part. I'll show you a spreadsheet that I have for like keeping score and keeping track later on. I played mostly Tempai. I think it was about 140 games of Tempai, and my list basically looked like this. I'll go a bit more in detail over the list in a minute, but this was basically my list. It was basically entirely hand traps with some Nibiru, and then only Droplet as a board breaker, and of course the one Duster as well. But honestly, this went in and out. The Duster went in and out, and it was mainly just a hand trap deck. I thought that hand traps were just really good with an extra bystial because Fiendsmith was weak to bystials, so this was what I played. I thought hand trap Tempai with Gold Sock and Blaster in order to have that extra consistency, just so that you didn't have too many games where you drew nothing. And then I also played a lot of Snake Eye, which looked like this. This was my Snake Eye list. You can see that it's a little bit different than most players' Snake Eye lists. And again, I have like a deck list section that I want to get to later. I'll go into more detail about my exact thought process behind this. And then I also played this cool deck, which I called Bystial Box because the spreadsheet that I was using called this deck Bystial Box, and I thought that that was a very cute name, so I just adopted it. I thought that's what I'm going to call this deck from now on. It is not like a Fiendsmith Bystial deck, like a DPE Control Cyburst deck, the one that I've played on my channel before. No, this is actually like a pure hand trap deck, right? The whole point of this deck is that it's almost entirely hand traps, so when you go second against Snake Eye, you will draw enough hand traps to stop them in most hands. So yeah, that was my experience, and all of them honestly performed relatively fine. The Snake Eye deck and the Tempai deck were a little bit better than this deck, as you might expect. But yeah, overall my performance, I feel like this 49,000, it was okay. I'm not disappointed in it. I did want more, but this is, in the grand scheme of things, relatively acceptable. Yeah, I thought that the reason why I didn't do super well in the end, better than my best and better than what I wanted. The reason why I didn't do that is because I don't think I was skilled enough. I think this time, unlike in previous Duelist Cups where I thought that my mental and regime for like sleeping and eating and preparing and stuff like that was maybe more of an issue, I think this time it really was just skill level in the format. When I played Snake Eye, I did not know the optimal lines against all the hand traps as well as some of my opponents. And when I played Tempai, I felt like my list was lacking a little bit of creativity in terms of what I could play to like counter the format. Same thing for this. So overall, I do feel like it was just a skill issue this time. It's a skill issue every time, really, but this time especially, I felt like My mind was in the right place, I just was not experienced enough with the decks and skilled enough at the format. So that is something that I'll have to improve for next time. But yeah, let me show you the decks that I had and my thought process a little bit more in depth. Okay, so going into some more detail about the decks I played and why, I want to start with why I didn't play Branded, because you might expect me to play Branded, and I didn't choose to play any Branded. This is the first Duelist Cup I think ever, except for maybe one or two that I played in before Branded existed in Master Duel. But this is the first one since then that I haven't played any Branded at all. And the reason for that is because I thought that this deck was just not good enough anymore. I thought that the Fiendsmith decks were just way too strong. In terms of when they went first, they won, basically. They would push through any amount of hand traps that aren't like floodgate hand traps like Maxi and Fool Loss, and it would be way too hard for Branded to fit in enough hand traps to like have a chance. I have been playing a build like this recently on the ladder, since before the Duelist Cup as well, that was utilizing Dark Ruler and Allure to find the Dark Ruler, and it was basically a board breaker approach to Branded. But the thing is, it's still really just a gambling on going first deck. I didn't feel like Branded was in a position where it could tolerate losing the coin flip, unless it was going against Tempai a lot and was sent first anyway. That's what this build is really good at. This list is really good at going first against Tempai with the unicorns, and obviously this is really good against Fiendsmith decks going first as well. But if you go second against the Fiendsmith decks, it's really only Dark Ruler that gives you a chance, or maybe you're lucky and resolve Maxi, maybe the Magnamut and the Sarania are enough, but probably not, and you only have 4 of them in the deck. I didn't feel like this was good enough to go second in the format. It turned out though that Branded might have been okay, just because specifically Player, as always, was able to perform with it. He was able to get to the top 10 again playing Branded, so that's something. Here is his list here, and I'll leave a link to his Twitter post about it in the description. So yeah, it turns out Branded might actually have been playable, and maybe I did handicap myself a little bit by choosing not to play it. But in my mind, I thought it was the reverse. I thought I would have handicapped myself if I committed to playing some Branded, so I decided to just see what would happen if I didn't play any this time. But yeah, it turned out this list maybe could have been okay. Player's list was probably a better choice for the event. I have been playing some Branded recently on the rated ladder after the Duelist Cup, and it has been doing pretty well, so maybe this was an okay choice. Maybe not this exact list, something closer to Player's list was probably better, but maybe Branded was okay. But that's why I didn't play Branded, and what I ended up playing was Snake Eye, Tempai, and a bystial deck. So this was my original draft of Snake Eye. This is the list that I originally queued up with. I think my very first game in the Duelist Cup was with this. The point of this build is that it's supposed to just be really, really strong at going first, specifically against Tempai and other Fiendsmith decks. The way it achieves that is by, first of all, playing 40 cards, so that it sees its best cards the most often, and specifically those best cards that I'm talking about are Unicorn, and Wraithsoth, and Fenrir, as well as the 1 talents, as well as the Cold Bite, and the Crossout, and the Wanted, you know, the best draws in the deck. The objective is that you're going to use the Tempai, the Kashtira cards to really punish Tempai and Fiendsmith decks for hand trapping you on the rest of your combo. You're going to summon Unicorn, and now if they want to Veiler your Snake Eye Ash, or use Droll, or use Ash, or use Fool Us, whatever, you're going to get to take Requiem out of the extra deck, or a Bident Dragon, and then on their turn, they have to really think about how they're going to play into the field, because as soon as they activate a monster effect, you're going to take away their Princess, or their second Bident Dragon, and that's really good. And that pretty much does cover most of the matchups, because, well, Snake Eye and Tempai were 2 of the best decks, right? And the White Forest deck is also a Fiendsmith deck, so you taking away Requiem does a lot there, and taking away maybe their Silvera or their this one, taking away the Arciella. Maybe this could be the target against White Forest as well, depends on the situation. So that was the objective, and the idea is that with Deception and Diabellstar, this Azamina package, specifically drawing Fenrir or Wraithsoth gets you to Unicorn as well, right? It gets you to both of them because you contribute with Deception to get the Fenrir off of the field, so that you can then summon the Unicorn. Right, you can send away a Fenrir with Diabellstar and then tribute the Diabellstar. So if you do draw your Azamina package, any of your Sinful Spoils starters, they will allow you to get to both Fenrir and Unicorn. So it is essentially 4 copies of Unicorn, which no other Kashtira deck can really say, right? Because this build lets you do 4 copies of Fenrir, 4 copies of Unicorn, sorry, the 2 Unicorn. And these both can search for Fenrir, which gets you to Unicorn. So that was the objective. It was going to be really strong going first. The reason it played 1 Engraver is because I was hoping to just transition into the Fiendsmith line as a bridge throughout my combo, using Closed Moon, of course. So that way I wouldn't draw any of the bad draws, like Tract. I thought Tract was a pretty poor draw because it wasn't full combo by itself. Tract really only achieved much when you had like a normal summon and then got impermed on the normal summon and then went into Tract for full combo, because Tract would require an extra body on the board anyway. Lurry is a similar thing, where Lurry is not a full combo by itself, it also has to be normal summoned, so it ends up just being a poor draw most of the time. And I wanted to cut that and just play the 1 Engraver, which you can summon from the deck with the Requiem. It still lets you make Beatrice, it still lets you make Desiree, it just allows you to not play as many bricks in the deck. The Engraver is itself a brick in the deck, but it's not as many as playing Lurry and Tract, right? This is just 1 brick, whereas the other 2 are 2 bricks. Another thing about this build is that it's playing 1 Fuelos. Again, I just wanted my hands going first to be good. I wanted to see 1 Fuelos, and it was mainly just so that I could cross it out. I wanted 1 Fuelos so that I could cross it out. Droll is something that you can draw to back up your board. Vela, you can back up your board. Imperm, you can back up your board. Ash, Maxi, they all work no matter what you do turn 1, but Fuelos can be dead. So I just wanted my going first hands to be really crazy, and that's why there's Talents is in here instead of another hand trap as well. Talents doesn't really help you go second in this format, not by itself, but it does help you go first really well. So that's the objective of this deck. It was supposed to just go first really, really well. It turned out though that most Snake Eye builds were not playing this Azamina stuff, and they were not playing anything close to what I'm playing. They weren't playing Kashtira, they weren't doing the 1 Engraver option, and they weren't even playing Azamina. They were playing Millennium, and it looked more like this. This is the Snake Eye build that I eventually transitioned onto. I think somewhere around in day 2, I decided to start playing Millennium Snake Eye because that's what every single other Snake Eye opponent I saw was playing. So here we're playing the Millennium cards, the Sengenjin, and the Golem, along with the Wedju Temple. Right, this package allows you to make use of Doomed Dragon really well. It's basically a 1-card combo that gets you to either Photon Lord or a Fiendsmith line, basically, right? 2 bodies plus an extra body in the back row does get you to sequence, because you can use 2 bodies in the back row for Doomed Dragon, which allows the Sengenjin to be a Snake Eye starter. And the same for this. This is also a Snake Eye starter. This is also a Snake Eye starter. As long as you have something else in your hand to put into the back row, like a Fuelos or a Vela, some other hand trap, right? That will allow the Sengenjin to be, or any of the Millennium cards, to be a 1-card starter. And it turned out that this was apparently just the best version of Snake Eye. It was maxing out on the Engraver stuff, right? The Fiendsmith engine wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't going to be the 1 Engraver. It was definitely better to start playing more Fiendsmith cards. I actually felt like Tract over the course of the weekend was actually just a really good card. the amount of tracks that were activated as the opening play that actually were just good was a lot more than I expected. This card didn't really seem to be a brick. Not in this build that just has so many random bodies that can go either into the back row or onto the board. So yeah, this was the more popular build. This was not actually the most popular build of Snake Eye in the end, but this was the more popular like variant, right? The Sengenjin, the Millennium build. I was playing it this way specifically with the Curry Photon because you can search for it with the Photon Lord. This was my hedge against Tempai. I was gonna basically say that if I went first, I would go out of my way, or if I got sent first, sorry, I would go out of my way to make Photon Lord, which on the opponent's turn searches for Curry Photon. And this card is just an FTK against Tempai, it basically just skips their turn, you can discard it, right, and then you take no damage. And that includes battle damage, so they can't stop this unless they have Cold Buy. You would just win if you got to combo, build any kind of board at all, anything with follow-up, and then Curry Photon, you would basically win. And the justification for why I thought this was okay is because, first of all, Tempai was always going to be one of the most popular decks, but second of all, this is a light fiend, so it is technically a starter in some way, shape, or form. You could normal summon this and go into Requiem. You could also search for this technically with Tract, an Engraver, so in the right kind of hand, theoretically, you could combo, save Engraver, just so that you can go Tract to search for this. And that would be a really nice play if you got sent first, so you knew you were against Tempai. I thought this was a really, really good card. But it turned out that nobody else was really playing it, and I guess just playing one more brick turned out to just not be that good of a thing to do. I think maybe it was better than people let on, but I never saw it once from my opponent, so I just assumed that it was not that good. I ended up cutting it because I wanted to make the deck smaller. At some point I went back to my older build, the Kashtira build of Snake Eye, but I did like this one. Something else about this that you can do is that the Galaxy Eyes Photon Lord, you can forcibly access this card, which is something I did a lot versus Tempai because of the Curry Photon plan. You don't just have to draw Sengenjin to get to Photon Lord. This is the easiest way to get to it, because this is your level 8, and then you search for a bunch of bodies in the back row which let you summon this, which you can then overlay immediately for Photon Lord. The main benefit is that it's a negate for a hand trap, it's a negate for your end board, but then the secondary benefit is that against Tempai it skips their turn with the Curry Photon. You didn't just have to draw Sengenjin though, you can go out of your way to make Doomed Dragon just using Poplars and Requiems and sequences, right? That way of getting things into the back row, and also Snake Eyes Diabellstar. This is your other level 8 to pair with the Doomed Dragon. If you can get to Snake Eyes Diabellstar, then you can summon it, overlay it with the Doomed Dragon, and this card even puts a card into the back row when it summons itself, so this can be halfway to Doomed Dragon by itself, right? And then the other half can just be Requiem, and then you don't have to draw any of the Millennium cards in order to still get to Photon Lord. That was my plan, and I did that a lot when trying to get to when playing against Tempai, and I was trying to get to the Curry Photon, so this actually did win me a lot of games, but it turned out that it might not have been that good just because a lot of those games where we were comboing, we were probably winning most of them anyway, not all of them, because Droplets exists, and Tempai Extenders exists, Sangan Summoning exists, but most of them probably would have been won anyway, right? Because if you do get to combo, you probably do get to win. So yeah, another thing that ended up happening was that I realized a lot of really, really cool Snake Eye combo lines. Some that I never even realized before were actually really, really impressing me. I figured them out myself during the course of playing this deck, obviously watching my opponents, seeing their combo ideas, on top of playing lots and lots of games myself. I ended up discovering a couple of really nice lines. So, first one that I just want to show you that I think is really cool is the combo line that you can do with just a Sengenjin. Okay, so the combo line for just the Millennium, the Sing Engine, goes like this. You're going to start with the Sing Engine, you're going to get the Golem, and that's going to get the Wedgie Temple. And this is why you need the Maxi. You just need this extra body in the hand in order to place a monster from your hand. And then you get that second Sang Engine. Now you're going to go for your Fiendsmith line. Close Moon into Requiem, into Engraver. And you're going to do this first and place the Requiem in the back row by equipping it to the Engraver. You're going to do this first because it's very important that when you summon the Dooms Dragon right now, you use the Requiem. You don't want to use the two bodies you used for the Wedgie Temple. You want one of those to still be there, because if you link off the Engraver with the Requiem attached, it's just going to fall away. So you need to make use of the Requiem, not wasting one of your Wedgie Temple bodies, because you're going to need it later. So here you go into Sequence, which lets you go shuffle away the two Light Fiends that are not Engraver into Lacrima, revive the Engraver, and then you can go for Beatrice. And then here's what's really cool, Beatrice can send OSS. Instead of sending Snake Eye Ash, like we all collectively thought that this card would be doing when it first, when Fiendsmith first released, instead of sending Snake Eye Ash and then going Promethean to revive it, we can instead send OSS because the Dooms Dragon is a Snake Eye card. So this lets us put back the Dooms Dragon into the extra deck in order to search Snake Eye Ash, and because we have our normal summon, we can go for the Snake Eye Ash. So here you go for a regular line, Poplar searches for Temple. We're going to send away the Wedgie Temple for free, then we're going to go Oak, revive back the Snake Eye Ash. Now we can use the Temple, placing the Snake Eyes Diabell Star. Now we're going to use this body, the Sengen Jin, that we needed to have on the board still, for Oak to summon Flamberge. And now you can kind of do whatever you want from here, but the key part is that you get to obviously go through Masquerena, go through Princess, trigger Flamberge, revive Flamberge. You want it on your end board. And now you can go for Heater. In most lists, this is replaced now by Sunlight Wolf, so this can be Sunlight Wolf. It's completely fine to be Sunlight Wolf as well, it makes no difference. Poplar effect, we haven't used that yet, to place in the back row. This is important, we need this. And now we can actually, if you want to, link away all four of these bodies for a 4 material Appaloosa. Most Snake Eye combos do not get a 4 material Appaloosa, but this one does, so the end board is extra strong. And you can place the Masquerena in the back row. Now you can use the Diabell Star, placing anything from the graveyard, it really doesn't matter, because you're going to send them away straight away for Dooms Dragon again. This card is not a once per turn effect to summon, it's only a once per turn effect to use its on summon effect. So by summoning the second one again here, because you put it back into the extra deck with OSS, you can actually make use of the body again. And in this case, because they're both level 8, we can actually overlay them for our... This is Caesar, because I don't actually have the Photon Lord in this extra deck, but this is supposed to be Photon Lord. And then Photon Lord is going to be an extra negate on top of your Appaloosa negates, and it's also going to be able to search Query Photon on your opponent's turn, so that Tempai basically has no chance. So that's basically this combo line that I realized halfway through playing on day 2, that I could do that with this build that I was playing. This build was able to do that, summoning the Photon Lord, getting the Query Photon from just one Sengenjin plus any other monster. And of course the deck is so many monsters. If you brick on a bunch of hand traps, the chances are they're monsters. So it was so easy to do this combo. Yeah, that's just one combo that stood out to me as being very, very significant, that I was very surprised to discover, that I was very surprised that we didn't already know that. As a community, OSS with Beatrice instead of sending Snake Eye Ash was something that it's really obvious now that you think about it, but for some reason it never occurred to me before, so I'm glad that I discovered that. But yeah, moving on to the next build that I wanted to point out, which is this one. I have it Millennium Snake Eye 2. That's what I decided to call this. This is what everybody ended up playing towards the end of the Duelist Cup on day 3. I think whether it was to do with the points or whether it was just taking a while to get to a consensus on how to play the deck or not, I'm not sure, but basically on day 3 everybody started playing this chase build with Dramatic Chase and Silvera, two cards which really didn't see much play in Snake Eye outside of like very, very early on when the cards were brand new and we played Silvera, but this card very quickly left most deck lists, same for this one, but apparently it came back, and I think the objective really with this build is that the Temple and the Diabellstar, the Snake Eye Temple, I mean, and the Snake Eyes Diabellstar are actually just 2 bricks in a deck that would appreciate not drawing them. It's just 2 bricks. If you get to combo, if you push through your opponent's hand traps and you make a board, you basically win. So who really cares if your end board is slightly stronger because you have Diabellstar, right? Who cares about the grind game of Diabellstar? Who cares about the grind game of Temple? I think people realize that what's the point in playing 2 bricks when the chase is just 1 brick? It's this one. And the chase is actually a good draw. So I'm tempted to agree. I understand that this was the better build in the end. It didn't play the Curry Photon. The Curry Photon that I played in the previous list is playing 1 less brick for that reason. It's also not playing the Diabellstar, the Snake Eyes Diabellstar I mean, and the Temple. And instead it's just playing 1 brick, which is the Silvera. And if you go first and you get to a Diabellstar, then you can make use of this anyway. It is still a brick, but this card ended up being an okay draw, and obviously you can search for this with Poplar. That was sort of the main combo line. You're going to go through OSS because you're sending it with Beatrice in a lot of those lines that I showed you just a minute ago. Similar lines to that. And then the Poplar has nothing to search. You can get Temple, but at that point you're already comboing, which means getting Temple for Snake Eyes Diabellstar really doesn't seem like it achieves much because you've already comboed. Instead, getting Chase so that you can get to Silvera in the end phase is actually a much better use of the Poplar effect, because this is an Omni Negate, right? This beats a Board Breaker, this beats Dropless, this beats Evenly, technically, Raigeki, you know, any Board Breaker, any powerful spell like Thrust, Talents, Grass, Cold by the Grave maybe, like whatever it is, this card helps beat that, which is a lot more significant than getting Temple, because the only thing Temple really helps you achieve most of the time is playing better into Nibiru. That's basically it. It helps you beat Nibiru sometimes, by getting an extra body after your opponent summons Nibiru. And I think it turned out to just not be that significant anymore. I felt the same thing. Temple summoning a body when your opponent hand traps you did not come up. And the Snake Eyes Diabellstar, this is really the only reason you play Temple, right? Like, it's the Snake Eyes Diabellstar. You need to play Temple in order to search this card. But the extra body that this provided and the extra grind game just didn't come up. So why not go for an Omni Negate to make your end board even stronger, right? It can be Harpy's Feather Duster or Heavy Storm as well from Tempai. So this turned out to just be the better option. This build also plays Zombie Vampire. This is something that everybody was playing. And I eventually switched on to exactly this build right towards the end of day 3. I decided that I'll just play this for Snake Eye instead of anything else. It is exactly what everybody else was playing. I also played the Photon Lord, though I think not everybody played the Photon Lord. They were playing just the Zombie Vampire. I understand why the Zombie Vampire would be an attractive card, because it lets the Sengajin combo get access to a card which basically baits a hand trap, right? Because this can access your Snake Eye cards if you hit any of these. Even if you hit Oak, because of the way the Millennium cards work, they've put so many extra cards onto the field. So, like, you can hit any Snake Eye card. Of course, Diabellstars help you access your engine, right? So this card basically baits a hand trap in the same way that this card negates a hand trap. And then from there, it's basically just the same thing but better, right? If you go Zombie Vampire, because if your opponent doesn't have a hand trap, then you resolve this, and it's obviously way better than just ending on a negate. It gets you to actual engine. So, like, I can understand why Zombie Vampire was really good. I still decided to play both, though, just because I didn't think there was a necessary card to play in place of it. The nearest thing was Nightmare Phoenix. This is probably the best card to play instead of the Photon Lord, because it's just a generic link 2 that helps you beat stun, and more importantly, it helps you like link off Princess on turn 3, because you don't actually have any other generic fire links, right? You go through Sunlight Wolf most of the time on turn 1, so you need something to link off the Princess after you use it as a disruption on your opponent's turn. And that would be Phoenix, right? Helps you clear a random back row and obviously turns off the fire lock. To be clear, I don't think you actually do need this, because if you can have Princess on your board at the start of turn 3, you probably just attack for game very easily, right? You just revive Flamberge and attack. You've probably already won the game. But if it matters, then yeah, you're going to appreciate having something to link off that Princess into. So that would be what I would cut the Photon Lord for, a Nightmare Phoenix. Anyway, moving on to my Tempai deck. This is the Tempai deck that I played. I won't spend too long talking about this because it's very generic. I basically just played Hand Trap Tempai. There was a lot of hype going into the Duelist Cup, I think, from some people that I was speaking to about like Sky Striker Tempai, where you play Engage and stuff like that. You play Widow Anchor as a board breaker, you play Afterburner, and you can play some more board breakers like Ultimate Slayer, right? I don't know why I thought it would come up from just the word Ultimate. There we go. Ultimate Slayer. Right, you would play this, but in the end I think it turned out that a hand trap build was better, and that was always going to be the case. You play a hand trap build of Tempai because you're trying to stop all of your opponents from FTKing, basically. Right, the Snake Eye decks are basically FTKs, so you want the hand traps, and the only board breaker that I thought was like worthwhile is Droplets. This one versus the Snake Eye board actually won a lot of games, basically because the end board would so often be Appaloosa and Flamberge plus IP in the back row. Right, once you hand trap them, if you drop like a Ghost Ogre and they play through it, or an Ash and they play through it, or a Vela and a Nibiru and they play through it, right, or even like multiple other hand traps, if they're able to push through hand traps and make a board, the chances are that board is just Appaloosa plus Flamberge and IP, and Princess in the graveyard. The Princess is usually okay to beat. It's not the hardest thing in the world to beat. It's not trivial, but it is not the hardest thing to beat. Especially if you have Droplets, which takes care of the Flamberge, the IP, and the Appaloosa. None of that means anything if you have a Droplet. And in the process, you also get to dodge an Imperm, right? If you start with normal summon Pydra, then they go Imperm, you can chain Droplet to negate the Flamberge or the Appaloosa, and then dodge the Imperm in the same chain, right? So Droplets was the only board breaker that I thought was good against Snake Eye, and everything else I just wanted a hand trap. I just wanted to draw multiple hand traps to stop them. Nibiru I thought was good. The only board breaker I played besides Droplet was the Duster, and sometimes I took this out for a third Nibiru, even more bystial sometimes. I just let this go. I thought that it wasn't necessarily as good as just drawing a hand trap, because the Snake Eye deck and the White Forest decks, they really do take like 3 or 4 hand traps to stop playing sometimes, right? It's not just resolve one of them and they stop. You really do, with that deck, play through 2 or 3, like, reliably. So you have to draw a lot of hand traps in Tempai. So yeah, that was a Tempai deck that I played. And then moving on to the last deck, which is the most interesting, this is the Bystial box deck. I called it this because my testing circle, the spreadsheet that I was using to keep track of my score, called it Bystial box, and I really like that name, so I'm gonna call it Bystial box. It's basically just a hand trap only deck. The point is you play so many hand traps that summon themselves, like Retaliating Sea, all the Bystials, Phantasme, Nibiru, that your opponent is completely stunned by the fact that you drop 4 or 5 hand traps, and then you basically win the grind game with big monster control, right? You basically just attack with Bystials, get value from Regained, occasionally make an SP, or a Dark, or a Seals, or a Typhon, and just win the game through very, very small amounts of incremental advantage. It's basically a bunch of hand traps that have extra value, like a tiny bit of win condition added into them, like the Retaliating Sea body, the Bystial body, the Nibiru body, and you convert that tiny bit of win condition into an actual win. It only really works against the Snake Eye decks and the White Forest decks. If you play against a stun deck, this is completely dead, this deck just folds. If you play against Labyrinth, this deck just folds. If you play against Tempai, this deck just folds. So it only does what it's supposed to against Snake Eye and White Forest. Every other deck I feel like it's kind of incompetent against. So I didn't play too much of this, but I did like it when I did. And against the Snake Eye decks and the White Forest decks, it actually did have a reasonable win rate. One card which I didn't play, which I absolutely should have, was Silvera. What I, for some reason, never realized, despite seeing this card a whole bunch from my White Forest opponents, is that it's generic. You can make this with anything, and then it Book of Eclipses your opponent. Obviously this is a way better generic Synchro 6 than Stardust Charge Warrior, which just draws a card. The objective of Charge Warrior is that if you draw Harpier Squadron alongside Retaliating Sea, you get a turn 0 Synchro 6, which is not really that good in my mind. I thought there was nothing to do better than Stardust Charge Warrior, but apparently there is now. It's Silvera. Obviously this is a very strong disruptive effect, so you're going to want to play Silvera over the Charge Warrior. The Harpier's main target though is the Bystials, so that you can make a Synchro 8, which is the Axel, and then the Axel lets you make Baron, basically, right? In the same way that Gamma does, right? By going through this card. Well, I guess the Harpier lets you do it on turn 0. So you get to go Axel Synchro, which on summon revives back the Harpier, and then this card also has a quick effect to Synchro. You just have to summon the Stardust Dragon, you tribute this, you summon the Stardust, and then that makes Baron to flow. And the Baron to flow is also unaffected for the rest of that turn, so they can't even interact with it, and you just get to negate whatever key piece of their combo that you want to. And then you basically try to win the game with, like, Baron control, right? Bystial Baron control. That's the objective of this deck. It was really fun. I appreciated playing this. This is what I played my stage 1 with. There's a video of that on my VOD channel. It was really, really fun, and it was surprisingly good. I thought it was surprisingly good. So yeah, that's the decks that I played. Next thing I want to look at, I guess, is I made a tier list, so I'll just go and have a brief look at that tier list again. Okay, so this is the tier list that I made. Looking back on it, it is definitely accurate at the top. It's definitely correct to say that Snake Eye was the best deck, White Forest was the next best deck, and then Tempai was the next best deck. There wasn't any White Forest in the top 10, but generally on the ladder you saw that White Forest was very popular. And I think if you look at the top 100 breakdown, which I'll show in a second, White Forest was the second most represented deck, and then Tempai was the third, and then pretty much everything other than those 3 decks was a step behind. It was represented in the top 10 and the top 100 basically in individuals, which says more about the players that chose to play it than it does about the deck's actual competitive viability. I think that even though things like Yubel and Snake Eye Fire King and Tia didn't make appearances, I think it was fair to say that they are stronger builds, stronger decks than the decks that did make one-off appearances, like Branded, for example, and Runic, which isn't even on here. I have Runic all the way down here at Suspicious tier, and I think that's accurate, right, to play Runic Stun, but apparently one Runic deck made it to the top 10, so what do I know, I guess. But yeah, I do think that's an individual player thing. Same for the Branded players making it to the top 10. I do think this list was maybe slightly inaccurate. I think Rescue Ace was nowhere to be seen. I don't know why this needs to be in Solid. This is probably just a poor deck these days, which is crazy to say. I don't think there's anything wrong with Rescue Ace, but it's probably just lower in the Suspicious tier. Blue Eyes was apparently kind of good, just because I guess nobody knew what to do against it yet. So this was maybe a solid deck. Melodious and Draco Slayer Melodious is like kind of good always. Labyrinth was better than this tier list makes it look. It was a lot better than like Chimera and Voiceless Voice and Branded, and Tia, which is all in Ubel even, which is nowhere to be seen. Right, Labyrinth, just a hard-focused counter-stun build of Labyrinth. Much better than some of these other decks. Same for Exodia, just like a stun build, should have been a bit higher up. Ubel should have been a bit lower down, maybe. And then stun is always really good. Same for Kashtira. I think I did accurately predict that Kashtira would be like a playable stun archetype. And that's basically what you expect in a Duelist Cup. You get a lot of the best decks, and then you get a lot of inflated amounts of stun, just because stun really thrives when you can really narrow down your opponent's decks to just a few, right? Just a few meta decks, then you can really counter them with floodgates and specific card choices which just fuck them up, right? That's what the Exodia decks were doing, that's what Kashtira was doing, that's what the stun decks were doing. So yeah, I think this list was overall fine. Some things could have been better, like the Labyrinth and the stun decks and the Kashtira decks should have been a bit higher. Ritual Beast probably should have been a bit higher. And apparently Tia and Ubel were just not that good. This Lubellion here, by the way, is meant to represent my deck, the Bystial box deck, which I was convinced it was kind of good, but I guess turned out not to be that good. Nobody else really had any success with it, and I didn't have too much success with it either, so this probably should have been down in Suspicious as well. But yeah, that's it for the tier list. Let me just take a brief look at the overall breakdown. Anyway, so this is the breakdown for the recent Duelist Cup. This is data compiled by Haas. Haas is a good boy. He's gotten most of the results here. You can see he's factored in points and placement and ordered everybody, got their deck, got a link to their Twitter, and exactly how many points they had, and of course there is the breakdown here, which we can look at. You can see that most of this is filled in. I think there's like 70 or 80 slots filled in, and only a few missing. So the overall breakdown really shouldn't be too much different than what it actually was if you did have all 100. And it is exactly what you'd expect, right? There's Snake Eye here, White Forest, then Tempai as the best 3 decks. Snake Eye is clearly the best deck, and then White Forest and Tempai are your next best options. And then everything else is clearly a step behind in terms of representation. I think you can see Labyrinth here, Ritual Beast, Stun, Branded, Dynamorphia somehow, and then like Exodia. It's just a bunch of one-offs, right? I think it's really just representative of which decks counted the best decks the best, which was like the Labyrinth, the Stun, the Dynamorphia, right? Even the Exodia, right? And the Kashtira. These are like examples of counter decks. You're obviously building those decks with a bunch of floodgates that specifically target these top decks. So that's why they got successful. And then there's things like Ritual Beast, Branded, which I think is more reflective of the fact that it's just good players choosing to play competent decks, rather than anything about them specifically being the next best deck or anything, because I think some of these could also be a good argument for the next best decks, right? Like Voiceless Voice, Chimera, Ubel especially. You could argue that these are the next best decks, just as much as you could argue that like Ritual Beast and Branded are the next best decks. I think this is more telling about what the specific players chose to play and like how good they are as players, and coincidence, rather than anything like super in-depth. But yeah, the most interesting part is obviously that it's these 3 decks, which is exactly what we expected. And then like the stun decks have like an inflated value just because of how competitive Duelist Cup Stage 2 is. So at the highest point totals, you can basically guarantee your matchups. It's gonna be Snake Eyes, it's gonna be White Forest, it's gonna be Tempai, or it's a stun deck mirror match, basically. But most of your matchups are gonna be these top 3, right? So if your deck just stuns these, you don't ever have to worry about playing against bad matchups, because it's not gonna happen as much. It's really not gonna happen as much. Nowhere near as much as it is in like rated and ranked ladder, so that's why stun always has an inflated like performance in Duelist Cups. And then other than that, it's just like decks that are clearly very good going first, like Ritual Beast, Branded, Tia, just things that players like to play, right? So yeah, that's pretty much my experience with the Duelist Cup. I'm always really motivated to be better after every performance. It's always never enough. I want more. I want to get top 10. So that's really my goal for the next Duelist Cup. I want to be in this top 10, but this top 10 here. So yeah, that's gonna be it for me. So thanks for watching.